Hey, welcome to Sipping Tea with Sabrina. In just a second, we'll be sharing the tea on mindfulness, being present and planted where your feet are. But if you never met me before, I'm Sabrina, the Dream Team Architect and President and CEO of Building Better Boards. I specialize in building elite leadership teams for corporate and nonprofit boards and CEOs, turning high level potential into extraordinary performance. If you're looking to transform your board or need support working with your board or team, you've come to the right place. Again, I'm Sabrina Walker Hernandez, board development and governance consultant, coach and facilitator who works with both corporate and nonprofit boards. I'm an international keynote speaker and your go to expert in strategic leadership and governance excellence. I've helped drive $36 million in revenue while building organizational resilience. And I'm here to share the insights and strategies that can make a real difference for you and your organization. So, we're going to get started, and we have with us today Eleazar L. And this conversation is going to be critical to those wanting to understand mindfulness, being present, and planted where you are. Whether you're a nonprofit, mission driven company, or association, that's why we have L with us. And so I am going to invite L to the conversation. And L, tell the people a little bit about yourself. Why are you here? What is your expertise? Go into it.
Yeah, well, one, just good morning. Thank you for having me and for setting the table for this conversation. I'm here because we connected. We had a really energizing conversation, and I accepted the invitation to come and share some time with you. A little bit about me. It's been a bit of a winding road. I have been a nonprofit lifer, have worked in a couple of different organizations. I'm based here in New York City, born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, and I am West African, Togolese. But I've spent most of my career in the nonprofit sector, primarily working in youth justice initiatives, specifically around the Raise the Age legislation here in New York City. Also done some trauma informed healing centered work with survivors of sex and labor trafficking, and also have taught mindfulness. I've worked as an outdoor educator with a couple of different organizations, and I'll share a little bit more about that. I've done some tech for good work. I've worked with nonprofits that are driving work focused on tech equity. And most recently in the season, I am working at Bonterra, which is a social good tech software company focused on providing access to technology and resources to help nonprofits drive more impactful work, collaborating with funders to provide fundraising capacity building. Outside of that, I teach mindfulness at the Queens Community Justice Center at a program called the Queens Hope Program, working with specifically young girls who are at risk for sex and labor trafficking, helping to create safe and supportive spaces to fellowship, convene, talk through the complicated life logistics that each of us shows up with. I also teach self defense and still do some outdoor education work. And so that's a quick snapshot of the winding road that's brought me here.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing um, your knowledge with us. And when we connected, I was just so appreciative because I struggle with mindfulness. And so I
Mhm.
thought, okay, this is something that was sent my way, so on purpose. So thank you for being here. So I have a set of questions here that we're going to get into because this is an important topic, right? So the first question is mindfulness might seem like a luxury for busy nonprofit leaders who are juggling multiple priorities. Why is it essential for them to practice mindfulness?
Yeah, I this is so this comes up so often, I think, across so many industries, but I think it's particularly prevalent in the social impact, social good space, where our work is really centered on building community, offering critical services, standing in gaps. I think about so many moments of crises and difficulties. Nonprofits are typically the ones that are delivering services, meeting communities where they are, and it attracts a specific sort of people to this work. And we're often caretakers of the communities that we're serving, that we're accountable to. And sometimes it can feel as though the ask is to pour until your cup is empty and then keep pouring. But I had a colleague and close friend share with me years ago. His name is Ife, and he's the curriculum manager at the curriculum director at Exalt Youth. And I was asking about his wellness practices because he was just on top of it. He would show up for work, would have really timely, smooth transitions when it was time to wrap up. He'd be out the door, and he was also juggling a lot of different things outside of work. And so I asked, and what he shared with me has really stuck with me till this day, is that either we find ways to carve out space to take care of ourselves and to practice mindfulness and self-care, or we'll have to confront the consequences of not doing so. And
Yeah.
so either you find ways to stand still and slow down, or your body will make you. And so after having confronted those consequences myself, primarily during the pandemic, where there was outsized need, and
Mhm.
it felt like a privilege, and it was a privilege to be able to do impactful, meaningful work while the world is crumbling and we're confronting our mortality daily. I realized that trying to pour from an empty cup just wasn't sustainable. This work is a marathon and not a sprint. And so it's so essential that we find ways to give to ourselves and slow down and carve out space for the things that are nourishing in ways that work can't be nourishing, and or it's nourishing differently, so that we're able to sustain ourselves for our families and our loved ones and ourselves, and to be able to do what we do.
Yeah, that makes sense because like I said, I struggle with mindfulness and my body
Yeah,
sure
you're not
did.
alone. Hmm.
I struggle with mindfulness and my body sure did, you know,
Hmm.
it told me. I
Yeah,
believe it was a direct result of my cancer diagnosis. And so you went a
yeah,
little bit into your
it's tough.
personal story, but can you share a little bit more about how mindfulness has impacted your leadership journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to share the mic with you too and hear more about how you've navigated and how you've been impacted and what your journey looks like as well. On my end, like I mentioned before, I've always been driven and drawn to do work that is purposeful, often emotionally taxing, but
Yeah.
also incredibly energizing in being able to combat injust systems and offer interventions. I think we all benefit from having someone at some critical juncture of our lives invest in us, infuse us with confidence, and see something in us that we might not have felt proximate to or been able to see ourselves. And so that's been a big part of how I've moved through the world and the work that I've been drawn to. But we're operating within, imperfect systems, to put it nicely. Um, and it's often extractive. It wants to exhaust us so that we can't do the work. And what I've learned, particularly in two really difficult professional seasons, one
Hmm.
primarily being the pandemic, where my work at the time was focused on providing interventions for young people impacted by the criminal legal system,
Hmm.
in the midst of the racial reckoning, George Floyd's murder, and on top of so many other names and other folks who were murdered at the hands of police and state violence. I felt even more called to dive in with both feet into my work. Um, Transparently, I was going to bed with my laptop, waking up with my laptop before I brushed my teeth, was checking email, sending out messages. There was so much to do. And so one of my means of coping and feeling like I was um, doing what I could from where I was positioned was to dive even further into the work, which was
Yeah.
cool for a couple weeks. It's like, all right, I'm not bored. I'm focused. I've got things that are moving. I feel fortunate to still be able to continue my work. Um, but in the midst of doing emotionally taxing work, necessary work, also confronting just the the realities of the world on so many different levels. Not to mention just being stuck indoors. Even going to the grocery store felt like an extreme sport, right? You're not
Hmm.
making eye contact. God forbid someone sneezes or coughs, crazy side eye, just death stares. And it was just an incredibly tough moment for so many reasons. Not to mention, if you're experiencing loss and just the uncertainty, and for folks that were generally well adjusted, like still had incredibly difficult times. And so
Right.
in the midst of that, I realized that I was burning myself at both ends, and what felt like a righteous, justified approach to just keeping my foot on the gas quickly became sort of just a moment of clarity where I realized, all right, this is just not the way to do this.
Hmm.
Nipsey Hussle reminds us, this is a marathon, right? We want to be able to show up and do this work with longevity, because these systems and barriers are not going anywhere. And I just had this really clear visual at the time, this image of running a marathon and getting to the end, but then you have to be carted off because you collapsed and didn't take care of yourself,
Yeah.
versus pacing yourself and pausing when you need to, ensuring that you're hydrating and doing all the different things you need to sustain yourself, so that when you get to that finish line or that checkpoint, whatever it is, you can celebrate with loved ones and friends, rather than being carted off in an ambulance. And that was a moment of clarity for me.
Yeah.
um,
Well, I got carted off in an ambulance. I didn't pay attention to the signs.
so yeah, say more about that. What season were you in? What was swirling in your world at that time?
Well, I was a nonprofit CEO and with the type A personality on this journey and worked in the third um, poorest county in the United States. I did a couple of campaigns, had to raise 2.5 million, and I had all cylinders a go. And my body just it resulted in dis-ease in my body,
Mhm.
and it
Yeah.
turned into two blood cancers, and I was
Oof.
forced to slow down. And
Mhm.
so in 2018 i I was going through chemo and what you call the red devil, and for 10 months, and then I had a at the 11th or 12th month I had a stem cell transplant. And so it was stress that brought it on, and I'm forever sharing that story. And as a matter of fact, this is why I love to have people like yourself come on and talk about this, because I think there's a lot of nonprofit, just like your story and my story. There's a lot of us that are trying to do this work, and it can be so stressful. But I always struggle with mindfulness. You would think after that, from 2018 to now, that I would get mindfulness. I still struggle with it. Every year,
Mhm.
I create a word, not create a word, I adopt a word,
Mhm.
and it was grace. Uh, and then the last 2 years, it's been mindfulness because I never get it right.
Mhm. It's
I'm
a problem.
always
We're
it's a
familiar
problem. I'm
with
always
ego.
out there, and I'm like, man, I can't get this mindfulness right the way it's supposed to be. And so when we connected, I was like, man, I gotta have them on. If not for anybody else other than
Yeah,
myself,
happy to be
right?
here.
Because I
Yeah.
struggle with this so much. But I don't know if you have anything in response to that, but I do have a lot of
Mhm.
questions when it comes to mindfulness.
Yeah, I want to also just acknowledge and affirm that it is something that I think we're all constantly figuring out, and what we might have needed in the last season is not necessarily what we need in this season. And so it's an evolving journey and process, as is life, right? As so many different things. And I think something that I've done that's allowed for me to reframe for myself is not just being caught up in the actions and the activities. As for example, let's say I want to go outside for a walk every single day, less so about the specific activity, but thinking about the kind of person I want to be, someone who carves out space for their well-being, someone who carves out space for stillness, and that can take different shapes and forms. And maybe if it's pouring outside, I don't want to go outside. And if it's strictly associated with that activity, then I might feel less further away from those behaviors that I want, but rather thinking of it as a characteristic or character trait that I want to adopt. And so I want to be someone who finds ways to slow down in the midst of the day,
Mhm.
finds ways to really seek connection with myself, my body, and others. And just giving ourselves grace, like you said, that word, understanding that it doesn't always happen in the ways that we sketch it out to, but as long as we're setting the intention and moving more closely towards it, giving ourselves that pat on the back. And I think it helps when you're able to visualize the things that you want to do. And so for me, I love to start my day at the gym before I have to meet with the world. I get some quiet, focus, Zen time, and it helps for me to see my gloves or my keys or my shoes somewhere visible so that I know, okay, this is something that's laid out for me and I'm going to lean towards it. I work remotely for the most part. And so there are days where I can be in front of my screen and look up and it's 6 o'clock and I haven't been outside of a morning trip to the gym. And so finding ways to be intentional about the gaps in my calendar when they're there to go and take a walk. I don't have to have a destination in mind. And just finding ways to set the intention of the sort of person who is engaging in those behaviors and finding ways to incorporate it in wherever you find space. And then the next stage I think is carving out that space more intentionally, which is easier said than done. But curious if you're doing anything right now, or if you're doing anything right now that feels like a practice or something that you want to do.
Well, I do, and I'm trying really hard, and it backfires on me. One is the one that's not backfiring on me, I'll just say, is I joined a lovely organization. It's a nonprofit organization, membership organization called Infinite Love. And they have like this EE machine that helps
Mhm,
restructure your sales. And I go and I try to spend at least 2 hours, 3 days a week there.
mhm,
And they say don't bring your laptop, but I do anyway. I'm bad,
mhm,
or your
mhm,
cell
mhm.
phone, and I do anyway. But at
Yeah.
least I'm sitting in that space to regenerate.
Mhm.
And the
And you said
other,
it helps you structure your what?
your cells, your body cells.
Oh,
You
cells.
know,
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
yeah, uh-huh.
Mm,
And it really has been working. And the other thing that I really try to do, what I'm doing that's backfiring, is not responding to emails like right away, even if it's a
mhm,
client.
mhm.
Um, it works sometimes, but some clients
Yeah.
don't like it. And so I
Mhm,
got to find a better way, because it can seem like a lack of communication on my part,
mhm,
although I'm just not using email as my things to do list, and I am responding with as I research the information. So I got to figure that out, right?
mhm,
And so as you were talking, I kept hearing in my head like, okay, because like I said, I've been studying mindfulness,
mhm,
the three pillars of mindful leadership. And
mhm,
you talk about paying attention, being aware, and being authentic. But I remember sitting in the seat, in the nonprofit seat, running the organization, and I
mhm,
would roll my eyes anytime anybody talked about these things, especially time management. So really explain to the people that are in that seat, and to myself again,
mhm.
how this benefits. How do mindful leadership benefit leaders in
Yeah.
practice?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it'll be helpful too to also see what our definitions of mindfulness are. And I think you spoke to it really nicely. The process of bringing our full awareness to the present moment, whether that's through a movement or we're just scanning our bodies or we're whatever it is, just the process of bringing our full attention to the present moment. And in terms of what that looks like specifically with leadership, I think that for so many of us, we have complicated life logistics. We are people, full people outside of our roles, our professional roles. We have community members that we are something to in some capacity. And so when I think about mindfulness and time management, um, I had a mentor tell me this a while back, and I think it was more of like a bad omen, just like something to pay attention to. But he shared that you were going to be really successful in your career, but your relationships are probably going to suffer. I see a lot of me in you. Like, yeah, no, like thanks for the compliment, but no thanks. Like, I don't want that. I want the career success. I feel really called to do the work that I do, but I also want to be balanced and have really rich, fulfilling relationships as well. And so, and he also does. So maybe that was, a different season in our lives, but I have found that it's so important to carve out the space for the things rather than
Mhm.
going with the flow and hoping that it happens. I used to define myself as pretty psychotic with my routines where I would be up at 4:30 and it's like, who wants to be up that early? And I did it because I felt that it gave me so much more spaciousness in my day. Not for
Mhm.
everybody, find out what works for you. But for
Not for
me,
me, honey. I will not get up at that
that's
time. I'm
that's
telling you.
real. And ask me the time I'm going to bed, which is just not aligned with that rhythm. And so I definitely need to figure out the back end of that. But I appreciate just the stillness of the morning, being up before most other people are. There's just a different sort of like quiet that comes from me in that early part of the day. Also live in New York, and so it's perpetually busy and things are in motion. And so that is sort of a sweet spot for me where gym is relatively empty. I can just move at a different pace and start my day on my own terms. And then from there, I will map out my calendar, but then also having firm transitions. There's always going to be more work to do. There's always going to be the next thing that requires our time, but understanding that we are in a marathon rather than trying to sprint to the finish line. That early start for me gives me a ton of spaciousness where I've taken care of myself, had some time for myself, start work early and have enough spaciousness to crank out the things that require the most energy. I also use an app called Rise, which gives me these alerts for my peak energy hours and gives
Oh,
me some context on this might be the time for you to crank out that the most taxing to-do list item today. Crank this out right now, and perhaps you carve out this block for your emails or phone calls, etc.
right.
But
And it's called
during the
Ride?
yeah, Rise. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
text it over to you.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, we'll put that
um,
in the comment notes too. Thank you.
mhm,
Thank you.
yeah. Also tracks your sleep, and so what I appreciate is that it'll tell you um, how much sleep that you have. And so it's like, oh, you are 20 hours behind the sleep that you need to be having for this week. Where am I going to find that time? But it reminds me to be more deliberate about trying to incrementally catch up on some rest. But I think the transitions is part of when I find pockets, or rather than find where I carve out pockets to care for myself. I have tried to be really deliberate about avoiding when I'm scheduling back to back to back to back meetings, allowing myself to show up presently. When I worked at the Lineage Project, which is where I really got my full on introduction to mindfulness. Lineage Project was a mindfulness focused nonprofit that worked with young people navigating incarceration, psychiatric care, homelessness, foster care, lots of different systems, and also worked with the direct support professionals that worked with these young people, ensuring that they also had support and resources. And so, went through an apprenticeship, phenomenal team there. And in a couple of our meetings, we would actually start the meeting and allow 3 to 5 minutes for folks to just show up. And so we'd cut our cameras off. Our co-ED at the time, Jessica, she would set a timer, and you'd have a moment to just come into your body and grab water, use a bathroom, grab some tea, whatever it is you need to do, shake it off, and then show up fully. And it was such an odd but refreshing thing to see, especially when we're told, productivity is tied to how effectively and efficiently you're moving, how are we fitting as much into these 5 minutes as possible, which kind of runs counter to that. And it was just nice to slow down and show up more fully present. And so to kind of thread the needle, I would say for me, the time management part has been me thinking about the sort of life I want to lead, where I want balance, not just to feel fulfilled in my career and have my relationships dwindle or have my health dwindle or have my spirit of adventure suffer,
Yeah.
but really thinking about all the facets that fold into who I am and the sort of life I want, and being deliberate about carving out space for those things so that I am doing all the other things that really bring me joy. Um,
Wow. You said a lot, so I'm gonna
I was trying to.
you stepped on my toes a little bit. I do need to get that app, and I know I don't get enough sleep and all of those things. So, you know, I'm listening. I think like many nonprofit teams face burnout.
Yeah.
We just face burnout due to high demands and limited resourcefulness. You
Mhm.
said some ways how mindfulness can help combat these issues, but really land the plane on how mindfulness, because remember, you're talking to people like me who struggle with
Mhm.
this. How can mindfulness help combat these issues of burnout at both an individual and an organizational level?
Yeah, I would say, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. In a sector where we're often putting out fires, responding to crisis, working with the most vulnerable communities, there is a sense of urgency that is just kind of par for the course. We kind of just accept it as what it is. We, aren't selling paper. We're working with people, and so there's a real sort of tie to doing right by the folks we're in community with and ensuring that we're good stewards of our role. And the way that mindfulness helps is that it gives us permission to carve out slices of solace and moments of stillness, knowing that because we're carving out that time, we are much more, we're better positioned to deliver on those aspirations. We're better positioned to deliver on whatever it is we set out to do, not because we've spent 8 hours straight just writing reports and reviewing and moving deliverables forward, but because we've carved out time to slow down, we're much more we're able to show up more fully, which allows for us to do our work more effectively, to support our communities more effectively. And if the benefits don't move the needle, holding space to confront the consequences, what happens if you don't take care of yourself, we can start at the burnout where and speaking for me, you begin to resent the lack of boundaries that you've stood up in your life, in your work. You start to question whether or not work that you might have previously been felt called to do, if that is truly aligned. I think there's a real tax on our empathy these days, where there's so many compounding issues and just inflammatory things happening that are mind numbing in so many ways, and really dysregulating. And so, in the midst of just being a human being, in the midst of all the things that are swirling, and doing work that's emotionally taxing if we aren't finding, or rather than finding, if we aren't carving out spaces to be still and to take care of ourselves, we're not going to last. We're not going to, or yeah, we're just not going to be able to show up as well as if we decide to prioritize our well-being as a means of going further.
Yeah. I'm going to say this, and it's because it's an observation that I made. Um, because I've been in this industry or was in the nonprofit industry for so long, and what I saw of the fellow nonprofit CEOs in particular, in the association that I was associated with, I saw a high rate of getting ill,
Hmm.
and I also saw a high rate of divorce.
Hmm.
And so everything that you're saying, it makes
Yeah.
sense to me. But I again, I tell you, I struggle with this, and I know
Mhm.
I'm not the only one. And
Yeah.
so if you are joining us, you really need to go back. If you're just joining us, you really need to go back and listen to this. And I would say listen to it on a repeat, because I know that it is something that a lot of us struggle with, right? We
Mhm.
don't listen to the signs. And Elle, just listening to you talk, the tone and even the cadence in which you speak is very much in line with how you show up and practice mindfulness. So I want to thank you
I
for
appreciate.
embodying that, because even as you're doing this, you're teaching and you're shining light on what it really means. And so go back, do yourself a favor. If you're just joining us, go back, really take this in, because this is something that I know, is going to really help you on your journey. And we are talking about mindfulness, being present and planted where your feet are. So, Elle, for someone that's new to mindfulness, what's
Mhm.
a simple practice they can start today to improve focus and clarity as a leader? I know you talked about the app, but what
Mm.
else would you suggest?
Yeah, and I wanted to also just lift up something that you shared with the increase, your observation of the increased rates of divorce and illness, and then I'll come back to the what we've what I've heard defined as sort of like portable practices that you can take with you wherever you are as a way to start. We get one body, right? We may have multiple jobs, multiple careers, multiple partners. We'll get to that, but we have this one body, and so it does so much for us. We have to remind ourselves that we have to give to it as well and not take it for granted. I think about how I feel on the days where I'm like, I'm tired, it's raining outside. I don't want to move my body. I want to just sleep in. And I give myself permission to do so. But I just share that to contrast it when I'm sick and I can't move my body in the ways that I want, or I'm injured. And it's like, damn, you
That's a
take
different.
walking for granted. This,
Yep,
broken foot is just is such a humbling reminder to not take this body for granted,
yep.
especially as we're getting older. And I think about the sleep that I'm missing out on and how I'm not caring for my body in that way. But then I also think about the ways I am giving to my body through nutrition and air and all those different things. And so just wanted to lift up that we get this one body, we can't get another as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if our technology is that advanced just yet, but we get this one body, and so we have to prepare to treat this as a marathon and to be deliberate about it, because it does so much for us and it's easy to take it for granted. And when I think about the increased rate of divorce that you mentioned, I think about what it feels like to give it all, before 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. and then come home to your partner, significant other, your friends, and like, yeah, I got nothing to give you. And that is just not a beneficial arrangement. Nobody wants that, to like, hey, I am spent Monday through Friday, but I might have some energy Saturday. Sunday I got to prep for Monday. And so the times in which I can give to, or rather share space in a way that is not exhausting with my partner is limited to this, tiny window. And so mindfulness is another way, and whatever that practice is for the individual is a way for us to give to ourselves. And it's not at all selfish. It's required, it's fundamental. If I am better resourced, if I have carved out space to be with myself, I just feel much more willing, and I'm able to show up in my essence, as opposed to when I've been in meetings all day, so I skip lunch, and now I'm annoyed because this person cut me off in traffic, even extra annoyed. I decided to stay up and watch the Knicks, disappoint me last night. And so I am more tired, and I skipped the gym this morning. But figuring out the ways to carve out space for the things that feed you and that are for you is so important. And it can look like counting your breaths. It can look like sitting still and physically feeling your feet planted beneath you, whether you are seated or on the floor, and just doing a simple scan from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head, but really bringing in your full awareness to see what it is that you're holding in your body. What are the thoughts that are swirling that you want to address and let go of? But I would say one of my favorite portable practices that I can do on the train before a meeting is just a body scan. I'll take a moment to plant my feet, and I will mentally just scan my body to see what I'm feeling, where I'm feeling it. And I'm taking really deep breaths throughout the entirety of it. Can take a couple seconds or a couple minutes, but I feel so much more regulated and planted and aware after doing something like that. I also really love another app for you called Insight Timer. I don't pay for a whole lot of apps, but Insight Timer is easily one of my favorite for on the go meditations. You can find a voice that you like, you can find a specific theme that you're interested in. And so maybe I am going to be sipping tea with Sabrina and I'm feeling anxious about it. I can look up a meditation for navigating anxiety before an event or before a conversation, and it'll have something specific for you with different time breakdowns. But something that I also really want to stress is that what works best for you is what's going to be best for you. For
Right.
me, I love movement meditations. And so I'm feeling really grounded right now because I started my morning. I didn't go to the gym this morning, but I taught a self defense class, and that was incredibly energizing. And it has me feeling so much more relaxed now because I got out a lot of just um, excitement early in the morning. And so I'm feeling more zen and planted now. Um, I recently got a motorcycle, and that to me has been a movement meditation where I don't have the luxury of getting lost in my thoughts, because then I might miss a turn coming up or a car that's braking abruptly. And so there are so many different things. It could be dancing, it could be eating a meal intentionally, which is something that I've done with students. It's like, oh, I didn't realize this texture and these flavors. But
Mm,
just bringing our full awareness to something, and rather than focusing on the outcome, just focusing on the practice of bringing our full intention to it and addressing lingering thoughts as they come, but letting them go and really showing up as fully as we can.
yeah, it's about slowing down and being intentional, and that's
Hmm.
probably why I found it so challenging because my mind is always going. And but I see the benefit, and one of them I know is decision making. So how does
Hmm.
mindfulness enhance decision making and emotional regulation for leaders who are
Hmm.
in high stress environments?
Hmm. Those words, emotional regulation, is hits it so squarely. We are being pulled in so many different directions, and we each have our own needs. We each have our own lived experiences that inform how we are able to show up in the world. And so I think about myself as relaxed and calm as I think I am. I know how much short of a fuse I have if I haven't eaten, haven't slept well, and something pissed me off, earlier in the day. It's like, yeah, I that impacts my capacity to show up as thoughtfully as I would like. And not to mention when you're in high stress situations, not to mention when you're in a season, just thinking about the sector and all the different things that are happening, whether it's increased scrutiny on equity and DEI and justice initiatives, federal funding shifts, real existential questions for leaders and for team members about whether they can continue to do the work that they've been called to do, work that is allows for them to feed their families. These are high stress, understandably understandably activating stimuli in so many different ways. And so we one just have to acknowledge that these things are happening and it impacts how we're able to show up. But by being able to slow down and zoom out and just call forward what's happening internally, I'm able to separate those things. And so, the way that you know, said this thing to me is, and my reaction is less about what you said and how you said it, but it's more about, "Oh, okay, I'm feeling really anxious and uncertain, but also tired and anxious, and that you're proximate to me, so I want to meet you with this energy when it's not even about you." And so being able to zoom out so that we're able to make decisions from a place of greater clarity versus sort of the knee-jerk reaction based off of all the other things that are swirling in our lives, beyond our work, beyond sort of our sector, because we all have things going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if you're a leader and you are feeling overwhelmed by the idea of adding meaningfulness to routine, to their routine, and to the organization's routine, what would you say to encourage them to start small but stay consistent?
Mhm. Yeah, a small thing, and the value of it cannot be understated, but giving folks just saying the things out loud, right? Setting the intention that this is a practice that we want to bring forward, and it's something that requires all of us to have our fingerprints on it, not something that should only come from, the executive suite, but is something that leadership is responsible for creating systems for, but the responsibility of creating the culture belongs to all of us. And so it is an all hands on deck sort of affair. Carving out 5 minutes for folks in meetings to arrive, to cut their cameras off if they need to take care of themselves in the ways that they need to. For folks that feel well resourced, feel free to stay on camera or cut your cameras off and just chat if you want to catch up and kind of shoot the shit, like whatever it is, but carving out some space and framing it as not subtracting from the quality or the productivity of the meeting, but rather adding to it because folks have had some time that they can spend in whatever ways feel nourishing to them. And then the ask is to then show up present. All right. We've got emails to respond to, presentations to come through. We all have that going on, but we are going to lean in and opt to show up fully present because we've set that intention, and we've also set the table with this specific act in the beginning, and maybe even at the end. I'm a big fan of gratitude. I had an incredible coach, career coach, Amy Preston, who would end our coaching sessions with the question, "What is one thing that I can honor you for?" And we're so used to honoring other folks when we see something good. But the practice of telling other folks what we want to be honored for can feel a little strange initially. Like, oh, what are the seemingly small things or significant things that I want to be honored for? And having to, or rather being invited to voice that out loud. I think that also goes a long way.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that. I am intaking what you are saying. And I am sitting here going, fighting my type A, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, back personality. But it's been really helpful to me and to those who are here and or to those who will be listening to this in replay. So I thank you. I'm going to shift just a little bit, but I'll come back to you. I just want to remind people that if they have any questions about board and fundraising, just look at my website, www.buildingbetterboards.com. And I want to also ask one more question. I'm going to check all the comments to see if there's a particular question. And then we'll end with that, with you giving us a last comment, because even as you talk about mindfulness, and I swear I focus, but I'm like, he said something about smooth. He said something about smooth. I'm going
Slow is
smooth.
smooth
Yeah,
and
I
smooth is
want him to
fast.
restate that. I want him to restate that. So I'm still learning the process. So can you restate that so my mind can let it go and focus?
Yeah, of course. And I'll restate it with some additional context, acknowledging that we are getting so many messages about productivity, about efficiency, where many of us are often thinking about how to do things as quickly as possible. And that doesn't necessarily run smooth, doesn't necessarily support this idea of mindfulness, where the focus isn't on productivity or efficiency, it's about awareness. Um, and so with that being said, understanding that there are so many of these messages that are telling us, get things done as quickly as possible, and quick is good. The alternative consideration is that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so when we bring stillness and awareness into our arena, we're able to make decisions and operate in a way that allows for us to be even more closely positioned to whatever it is we were hoping to get out of that initial intention. And so in the spirit of wanting to move fast, remembering that slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Oh, wow. Okay, that stuck with me. I'm going to write that one down. I'm going to put it as a mantra. Slow is
Get it
smooth.
tattooed. There you go.
It's fast. It's gonna stick with me. So I am experiencing a little weather here, so I don't want us to get disconnected. So with that in mind, El, um, my last words that I want to leave with is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. But I also want to give you the opportunity that if anyone is interested in continuing this conversation with you, how would they get in contact with you?
Yeah, like Abraham, we can be Lincoln. We can connect on LinkedIn. Eleazar, Adjehoun. I'm sure, yeah, the my name is spelled here, and so you can find me there. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for stitching together these conversations. For context for folks on how we met, we actually worked together through the Jumpstart program. And so I wanted to also share for any folks in the sector thinking about mindfulness and just capacity, our internal capacity, but also organizational capacity. Our work is really seated at that intersection of working with funders and nonprofits to support capacity building, specifically focused on fundraising revenue from individual donations. And beyond that, I wanted to ask you, Sabrina, what is one thing that I can honor you for, one thing that the folks that are listening can honor you for? I know there's a lot, but one thing that comes to mind.
Well, the one thing that comes to mind, so I'm thrown by the question. I want to say that I know your coach
Mhm.
ended it, things like that. But I'm thrown by the question.
I
I
was too, so I
Yeah.
get that.
So the one thing that you can honor me for, and when I hear it, my process it, I think, okay, is that something I'm doing good? Is what I'm thinking. So I
Anything
would
at
love.
all, and no pressure to respond quickly. Think on it, whatever feels most resonant for you. But
Well,
anything
I will say this, and I will say this to the audience, and I will say this to you and to my clients is my goal is to provide the best service that I can provide, but also at the same time honoring the fact that I am in this learning journey of being mindful and that I no longer hold myself in a space where I have to immediately respond to something. It may take me 5 days as opposed to 5 minutes. And I I need people to be okay with that. I need to be okay with that. So did that work?
that is, yeah, that more than works. It's working overtime, and I want to honor you for you setting those boundaries and being clear and thoughtful about what it is that you need to sustain yourself in this work in the midst of being pulled in so many directions, in the midst of being called and looked to by so many different folks. Our sector is better because you're in it, and we want you to do this with longevity. And we need you to be healthy and to be here. And so take the time that you need, and I honor you for that.
Perfect. Thank you. And that's sipping tea with Sabrina. I will see you next time. Thank you, Elle. Bye bye.
Thanks.